Hello, welcome to Duncan Diggs Gardening. Tulips, some of them are going strong, some of them are finished. Perfect time to take stock of what worked and what didn't work in your garden in the early spring. And these were lovely, really nice, put on a good show, quite early flowering. But do you know, I think I'm going to put them in the ground. Want something different for this pot for next season. Time to start thinking about those kinds of plans, even though we're still in spring, strictly speaking. And there's a few pots and assorted different plants around the garden that did perform, some that didn't, and it's very much about that kind of forward planning. So welcome to the show, and let's get going. I can categorically tell you what definitely didn't work this year, and this is daffodils. Pot is absolutely packed with daffodils, and at first I thought maybe I've gone overboard, I've put too many in, but you can actually space bulbs very, very closely together to get that kind of packed tight big show if you really, really want to. Tulips work well for that kind of thing also. As long as they're not touching, you'll be fine. But in this case, we had one, two, and I don't know if you can make out, but these here are all, and this one here, they're all buds that basically formed but then failed to open. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. It could be a lack of nutrition in the soil. Could have just been certain weather conditions. Could have been a particularly hard frost that we had. Not that I think that that's actually happened. In any case, it's all just gone horribly wrong, frankly. And it happens, and that's fine. And we move on. So I will. I can't really trust that these aren't going to come back blind, as they say, the next year. So, considering this is a fairly substantial pot, and I could probably pack it out with alternatives, I'm going to get rid of this plant material, compost it, and chuck the rest, basically. What do you think? Didn't think so. Now is the time to start keeping an eye on roses. Now, what I mean by that is, obviously, they're all starting to grow, and I'm pleased to report that the pruning I did earlier on in the year seems to have paid dividends, and we have some nice healthy growth, and hopefully they'll put on a good show later in the year. That's not quite the problem, though. The problem now is moisture, warmth, and it's the ideal conditions and time of year when you want to be keeping a lookout for green fly, black fly, the early signs of caterpillars. Last year, a lot of my roses were munched to death by caterpillars. Never seen so many butterflies. I think the warm, wet spring had a lot to do with that. So it's very much worthwhile going around all of your roses now and starting to inspect them all. In some cases, I can see that some of these leaves have actually been eaten. You have that kind of typical circular motion of a leaf cutter, effectively. But that's not necessarily an indication of an infestation or a problem later on, because on the whole, all the other leaves seem absolutely fine. If you do spot green fly, try not to use any pesticides on them. It's actually just a simple matter, if you can stand it, to just pinch them off with your fingers if there's not too many. As long as it's something that you keep on top of, you can normally keep them fairly pest free. And you know, they're still insects at the end of the day. I don't want to completely deny them any access to the plant life in the garden. That's part of the point. So, you know, don't panic too much about it. But very much at this time of year is the time for roses to be eaten, especially as the buds start to form as well, because you get a lot of the insects around the buds. They're attracted to the effectively the sap, or at least the sugars that start to form, and it can ultimately, if it's bad enough, it can stunt the growth of the plant and affect flowering later on in the year. So it's certainly not time to panic, not yet anyway, but just spend a few minutes inspecting each of your roses in the garden now that they're coming into leaf, and keep an eye out for those creepy crawlies. Now, if you're actually liking a plant and you're looking for something that doesn't mind wet conditions, a snake's head fritillary is absolutely perfect. They don't mind a little bit of shade, and they love to have that kind of wet feet, so to speak. There's always a little bit of danger planting it underneath a tree, like I have with this weeping pear, that the tree will draw up a lot of the moisture from the soil and they might not necessarily thrive. But this clump in front of me is at least a couple of years old, and it's definitely bigger and better each year. They're very much a plant that you can just stick in the ground, forget about it, and they'll come back every single year. So highly recommended, and a good indicator of spring, and something a little bit of an alternative to your daffs or your tulips, which are very, very traditional, and they're lovely, but something a little bit different. And they'll keep on flowering for a while. You'll certainly get a few weeks out of them. And as I say, if your garden is subject to sort of minor flooding or gets very soggy, very damp in the winter, especially if we have a very wet winter, these are perfect. So yeah, I encourage you now. You might not necessarily get them in the best of condition now, but this is the perfect time when a lot of garden centres are going to be selling these at a discounted price because they're already halfway through their life. Get some now in time for next year. Well, if you're looking for an alternative to a tulip or a daff, and as lovely as they are, you might want to try something different. You can't really go wrong with a couple of other options that I've got here. Um, the first is a Doronicum, you can see behind, and considering it's not summer, to have that really bright yellow daisy, which is so typical, I think, of a summer flower. It's quite a nice little find for me, actually. It comes back every year. Very, very straightforward. Likes the sun, so I've kind of put it in as sunny a patch as I can find in my garden. And overall, as long as you keep deadheading it, it's not unlike any other kind of spring flower like this. So it'll come back every year, and needs very, very minimal maintenance. So as an alternative to a tulip or a daff, I think that's a really good choice. The other one I've got here is this is a ranunculus, and these flowers will open up a lot more as they unfurl. You can see this one's got loads of buds on it. Again, this will come back year after year, and provide another splash of colour that's just a little bit different to your kind of typical daffodil or your typical tulip. So I've bought a couple of these in like this sort of creamy with a pink tip, and I'm going to plonk them in the maple. Years of enjoyment from them. Now, I've spoken about mint in the past. I have a mint planter over there, which is kind of taking over a little bit. And this is another kind of mint which I just wanted to introduce you to. This is actually called an apita, and its common name is, as you can see, catmint. There's a few different varieties. This is a slightly bigger spread, longer shoots, and I have a more compact version in another pot. And as with other mint, it's absolutely crucial that you because it will completely spread and completely take over. And now, obviously, as you can see, it's pretty popular with the local wildlife. And I have no doubt in about 10 minutes time he'll be on the roof of the house. But in the meantime, yeah, lovely purple flowers, tall sort of spikes of purple flowers as well. They die back once they finish flowering. You can put them right back to the ground, and they'll spring back up again the next year. They don't need a lot of nutrition, so yeah, on the whole, they're pretty easy to look after. And if you're looking for something that's a little bit of an alternative to just your standard common or garden mint, this obviously is a nice alternative and has plenty of other benefits for certain people. Can you get off now so I can get on with me day? No? Okay.